The build-up to the Ivorian elections this year have already been controversial for two main reasons. First of all, the opposition is criticizing the president for running for a fourth consecutive term. This issue was already raised in the previous elections, which led to protests and eventually to the opposition boycotting the elections. The second reason why this year's elections are controversial is that the two main opposition candidates have been excluded on what we could call technical grounds relating to their registration as presidential candidates, and the opposition has also objected to their exclusions. I think the most likely outcome is a fairly easy victory for the incumbent, Alassane Ouattara, because his main challenges are representing relatively small and relatively new political parties that don't have the traction of the old parties. I also think there's a quite significant likelihood of a boycott campaign, especially from the two major opposition parties, which would mirror some of the dynamics we saw in the previous elections in 2020. I'm currently working within a project focusing on electoral boycott campaigns. So we are looking quantitatively at boycott campaigns across the world since 1946. And by a boycott, we mean that an eligible candidate, for one reason or another, chooses not to contest in the elections. This could be either because out of a protest around the conditions for elections, or for other reasons, for example, the overall security situation in the country. Our team has so far coded 194 cases of electoral boycotts, and what we can see so far as a provisional result is that the main demands that boycott campaigns pose are related to the electoral system. So they object either the independence of the Electoral Commission or the exclusion of candidates, as we are seeing now in Côte d'Ivoire. So based on the research we are doing on boycott campaigns, I would say that many of the key issues that boycott campaigns usually mobilize around are present in Côte d'Ivoire today, which is why I think there's a pretty good chance of a boycott. Côte d'Ivoire has experienced significant development gains since the armed conflict ended in 2011. But the political development in the country has not been as positive, so there have been considerable democratic problems since the end of the civil war, not least relating to the fact that the incumbent Alassane Ouattara is now running for a fourth term. He and his administration is arguing that his candidacy is constitutional because there was a constitutional revision in 2016 and that he's now running for his second term under a new constitution. But the opposition, along with a long line of international observers, are saying that this is kind of a constitutional capture where the incumbent is using the state system to remain in power beyond the two-term limit set by the Ivorian constitution. So overall, the elections in Côte d'Ivoire this year are an illustration of some of the democratic problems that Côte d'Ivoire is currently facing. Well, unfortunately, there's never been an Ivorian election without some degree of electoral violence. Very often it has been on a fairly low scale, but in the previous elections, for example, we did see opposition parties encouraging their voters to take to the streets and protest the candidacy of Alassane Ouattara, which led to confrontations with security forces. So I do think that there is a risk, even in the upcoming elections, for opposition supporters to clash with security forces as one source of electoral violence. There's also an increasing fragmentation within the opposition, which means that there's a risk of potential clashes between different factions within the opposition as well. I think that diplomatically the Nordic region, along with the international community, are in a bit of a dilemma when it comes to the current situation in Côte d'Ivoire. So on the one hand, we do have significant stability and development gains, especially considering that the country is still coming out of an extended civil war. On the other hand, we do see that the incumbent administration is using the state bureaucracy to reinforce its hold on power, and this has led not only to a lack of reintegration and reconciliation after the war, but also to increased polarization between different political supporters. Nordic actors need to engage with Côte d'Ivoire in a way that, on the one hand, addresses the democracy deficit, while also encouraging the good signs in terms of development and general stability.